ADC is the most polarizing role in League of Legends, riding the line between dealing damage and playing safe, able to win an entire teamfight or be one-shot by an assassin. To understand how ADC evolved into what we know today, let's go all the way back to the release of League of Legends. Watch as the ADC roster grows and changes. Bot lane metas come and go, and pro players rise and fall, as we cover the entire history of ADC. It's October 27th, 2009, and League of Legends has just had its official release. The original roster is 40 unique champions, and 5 of them are ADCs: Ashe, Sivir, Tristana, Twitch, and Corki, with the first set of champions that would set the ADC role into motion. But they weren't the same as we know them today. At this time, Ashe had her slowing passive on her Q, being a toggled ability you could turn on or off if for some reason you didn't want to slow the enemy. Her actual passive used to stack up out of combat and then empower her next auto attack. Tristana's kit was relatively similar at this time, however her old E didn't have the stacking bomb mechanic of today. Instead, it dealt magic damage over time and applied grievous wounds. Sivir's W was also different, being a toggled ability allowing her to spend mana to make her blades ricochet. Twitch's W was very strange on release, being an AoE slow around him based on how much poison was applied to the target. And surprisingly, Corki's kit was very similar to today, as he hadn't received his package rework yet. But these champions were not the only things that were different back then. These were the very early days of League, and so the player base was still figuring out what the best strategies were. Junglers didn't really exist yet, as it was too hard to clear the jungle. Many ADC champions actually ended up playing mid instead of bot lane. And in these early days, it was common to see bruisers and supports playing together in the bot lane. During this time between League of Legends release and the start of Season 1, one of the most popular ADCs of all time would join the ADC roster: Ezreal. Ezreal stood out against the other current ADCs, as he focused more on casting abilities rather than auto-attacking. But Ezreal's W was completely different back then, sending out a wave of energy that would damage enemies and grant allies attack speed. Another less iconic but beloved champion was also added to the ADC roster: Kog'Maw. Since his release, Kog'Maw has not changed very much, except that his Q didn't start as a skill shot, instead being a targeted ability. But this time before Season 1 was truly wild, as many players were still figuring out how to play. It wasn't until Season 1 that we really started to see the ADC role begin to take shape. Season 1 would see a record 29 champions added to the league, and 3 of them were ADCs. The first being Miss Fortune. At this time, Miss Fortune's strut ability was her passive, and her W was a completely different ability called Impure Shots. Impure Shots actually rewarded Miss Fortune for hitting the same target over and over, a complete opposite to Miss Fortune's love tap of today. Caitlyn was the next ADC to join the roster. On release, she had the exact same abilities as today, except back then her W and E did not proc her passive. The final ADC to be added in Season 1 was Vayne. Vayne has not received any real rework since her release, playing exactly the same way in current League. The end of Season 1 would finish with the first Worlds Tournament, a spectacle of the highest level of play at the time. In this tournament, it was clear that jungling was a standard role in every game, as players realized that leaving all the monster gold on the map was very inefficient. This made bot lane the only duo lane, but the marksman support meta that we know today still wasn't fully there. Miss Fortune, Caitlyn, Corki, and Ashe were the most popular bot laners during Season 1 Worlds. These ADCs were often paired with enchanters like Janna, Soraka, and Sona. But there were some crazy bot lane picks that came out at Season 1 Worlds. Garen ADC, Poppy ADC, Lee Sin ADC, Jarvan ADC, and even a Blitzcrank ADC with Soraka support. There is even one game during Season 1 Worlds where the players were laning duo top and they had solo bot lane Caitlyn versus solo bot lane Cho'Gath. During Season 1 Worlds, we would also see many ADCs like Corki, Ashe, and Misfortune all played in the mid lane. In the end, Fnatic would win Season 1 Worlds, and LEMMiNO would be the first ADC to claim the Worlds title. But with Season 2 just around the corner, the role of ADC was about to evolve faster and faster. Season 2 would see 3 more ADC champions added to the roster, starting with a champion you may not be used to seeing in the bot lane, Graves. Graves was originally released with the intention of being an ADC. At this time, he did not have his shotgun mechanic that stops him from harassing through the minion wave, instead having normal basic attacks and a different faster Q. This made Graves an aggressive ADC that could stack armor with his passive and dash in to fight. The next ADC added to the roster would be Varus. But in Varus' champion spotlight, he was originally targeted to being a mid laner. Releasing with almost the same kit as he has today, it does make sense that he could play mid with his long-range poke. The final ADC of Season 2 was Draven. On release, Draven had a different passive, which was much more like his brother in the top lane. Wicked Blades allowed Draven to apply a bleed on every auto attack. We can also see that in the Draven champion spotlight, the bot lane meta had really started to take shape, looking much more like a traditional bot lane we would know today. And on May 23rd, during Season 2, there was the first visual overhaul to Summoner's Rift, making the appearance of bot lane a bit better. Sivir and Twitch's Ws would also be updated into the versions we know them as today. By the time Season 2 Worlds rolled around, players had realized that melee ADCs were not the best. So during this Worlds, there would be no melee bot laners present. However, there were some other interesting strategies that teams came up with. This was the first instance of proper lane swapping, where bot laners would attempt to swap and lane against the enemy's top laner. This allowed champions like Vayne and Kog'Maw to have a free scaling lane without getting bullied by champions like Graves or Ezreal. Season 2 Worlds, in the end, would be won by TPA, with Bebe having huge impact on his Vayne. Season 3 began with one of the worst ADC releases to date, Quinn. On release, Quinn was meant to be a bot laner that could form swap between Quinn and Valor, ranged and melee. But this completely failed. Quinn on release was one of the jankiest champions ever, and so Quinn never really found her home in the bot lane. But it wasn't all bad for Season 3, as 2 stable ADCs were added to the roster. Lucian was an extremely well-designed champion. With his passive rewarding weaving autos between every ability, Lucian's gameplay felt both unique and fluid, like a modern League champion. Additionally, Lucian's champion spotlight would be the first mention of the marksman subclass. Lucian was then followed up by Jinx, a champion release that planted the seed for one of the most iconic ADCs in League of Legends history. Since release, Jinx has not had too many significant changes, other than the stacking on her passive. During Season 3, some iconic ADC players would break out onto the scene. On July 23, 2013, Hayam Gosu would release his first Vayne montage. This montage is currently sitting at 3.5 million views. At the time, Gosu was pushing the potential of the ADC role and Vayne. Kiting, dodging, and completely 1v9ing games, Gosu would start to become one of the most iconic solo queue ADCs of the time. Season 3 would also mark the beginning of the LCS and EU LCS, creating the first wave of popular esports ADCs. Names like ArmorCutiePie, Doublelift, Sneaky, and Wild Turtle. The meta for Season 3 Worlds was heavily based around Corki, Caitlyn, and Vayne. Corki for his Trinity Force power spike, Caitlyn for her lane dominance, and Vayne for her hyper carry potential. But as Caitlyn and Corki were so dominant during the laning phase, lane swaps were inevitable, as they allowed for a free lane for Vayne to scale in. Familiar faces of Wild Turtle and Sneaky would make it from the LCS to Worlds, and some more iconic ADCs would also be brought to the international stage, names like Imp, Piglet, and Uzi. But 2 of these players would stand a cut above the other ADCs, Piglet and Uzi. Piglet from SKT would win Worlds. his Corki and Caitlyn being much better than the rest of the competition. Piglet would finish the tournament with the highest average KDA of 9.7, but Uzi, being just 17 at the time, was also a cut above the rest, playing his iconic Vayne, being one of the few players that could pilot her at a pro play level, and making it all the way to the finals against SKT. Season 3 was truly a highlight year for the ADC role. If you want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. Unfortunately, Season 4 wasn't very special for ADC, as it was the first season in which no ADCs were added to the roster, and the main seasonal change of cleaning up the bushes only changed the river bush in bot lane. But the most exciting thing for ADCs was Season 4 Worlds, as we got to see the return of Uzi, Imp, Sneaky, and Wild Turtle. There were also some new faces that would become household names of Deft and Reckless. This Worlds meta consisted of Lucian, Tristana, and Twitch with his new visual update. Lucian and Thresh was seen as the best bot lane during the tournament, being a very aggressive lane bully. But Imp of Samsung White rejected this Lucian and Tristana meta, playing 10 games on Twitch throughout the tournament, with his next most played being only 3 games on Corki. Imp was so dominant this tournament, he got 1 pentakill on Twitch and 1 pentakill on Vayne. Uzi, playing on Starhorn Royal Club, would yet again make it to the World's Finals, matching up against Imp. But in the end, Samsung White would go on to win Season 4 Worlds, with Imp carrying the team to victory. Sadly, at the end of Season 4, I'mACutiePie would post a video declaring he wouldn't re-sign with Dignitas. This would be one of the first beloved LCS players retiring from the scene. I'mACutiePie stated that he got into professional league to have fun, but the corporatization of the scene drove him away. And maybe it was good he got out when he did, because Season 5 was about to turn the ADC role completely on its head. Season 5 was the map update that brought League of Legends from looking like an eyesore up to the level of a modern game. This map update also changed the dragon from just giving your team gold to giving your team a stacking buff. This placed much more importance on the bot lane, as you wanted early priority to start stacking dragons. Season 5 would also add one of the most unique ADCs to the roster, Kalista. Kalista took the kiting of a traditional ADC and baked it into her kit. With her high skill ceiling, Kalista would go on to be extremely popular in professional play. And throughout this year, Kalista would have a high ban rate and high pick rate in many regions. During Season 5, Tristana and Ashe would also receive gameplay updates. Tristana's E was changed from the damage over time into the stacking bomb that we know today. And Ashe would have her passive and Q changed, making her passive the slow and her Q the flurry of arrows. But as Season 5 Worlds rolled around, there was a juggernaut-sized threat looming over ADC's heads. 5.16 was the Juggernaut patch, otherwise known as one of Riot's biggest mistakes to date. This patch completely overhauled the Juggernaut class, making them the most overpowered champions in the game, right before the start of Worlds. This had a huge impact on the top lane meta, but for ADCs, the main disaster was that Riot tried making Mordekaiser into a melee bot lane carry. This was done by completely reshaping Mordekaiser's kit, making it stronger in duo lanes and granting the duo extra experience. The cherry on top was allowing Mordekaiser to curse the dragon and summon a controllable ghost, which as expected was completely broken. Mordekaiser was so overpowered that at Season 5 Worlds he had a 91% ban rate, being banned 68 times. Mordekaiser was peaked in just 4 games, and in those 4 games he was played in bot lane and had a 100% win rate. The rest of Season 5 Worlds would be dominated by Kalista, Jinx, Tristana, and Sivir. This Worlds would see SKT claim their second Worlds title for the first time in League of Legends history, having an incredibly dominant performance, only losing 1 game throughout the tournament. Bang on his Tristana and Sivir would have the highest KDA in the tournament, at a staggering 15.8, raising the bar on what it meant to be a great ADC. This 2015 SKT roster was so much better than the other teams at Season 5 Worlds. But going into Season 6, almost every ADC champion was about to be changed. Season 6 would shake up the ADC meta forever, with changes to 7 ADC champions. Graves would have his auto attack and Q change, giving him the shotgun mechanic we know today. This made him not able to poke through the minion wave, pushing him towards the jungle. Corki would also receive his package passive, resulting in Corki being slowly moved towards the mid lane. Misfortune's passive was changed into Love Tap, rewarding alternating attacks, and her W was also changed to become Strut. Jinx's passive was changed to grant attack speed on every kill. Caitlyn's W and E were changed to proc a free headshot when each were hit. These changes made ADC's kits much more synergistic with themselves, bringing them up to modern standards and making them feel much more satisfying to play. Season 6 would also have the release of one of the best designed champions in League of Legends history, Jhin. Becoming a huge fan favorite for both gameplay and design, Jhin took the sniper fantasy of a champion like Caitlyn and completely reinvented it. With his obsession of perfection, the beauty in killing, and the number 4, Jhin is a cult classic champion. Season 6 would also see Tyler 1's rise in popularity as his inting clips started to go viral. Sitting in his college dorm room, being toxic and running down ranked games, Tyler 1's name was on the radar. Season 6 also added elemental dragons, placing even more importance on the bot lane to start dragon stacking. At Season 6 Worlds, Jhin dominated the bot lane meta, with Caitlyn and Ezreal trailing behind. This was because First Turret Gold was introduced into the game, and combined with dragon stacking, having a winning bot lane was a must. This Worlds would be won by SKT, solidifying their dynasty with back-to-back Worlds wins. Although not on a hyper carry, Bang's Jhin was the backbone of SKT. During Season 6 Worlds, Bang averaged a 9.2 KDA, playing extremely consistently. But hypercarries would be back in Season 7, as League of Legends was about to be plagued by one of the most OP support items to ever be released. Season 7 would take a new spin on champion releases, with the ADC and support duo of Xayah and Rakan. There were some duos before this, like Draven and Darius being released around the same time, but Xayah and Rakan as a bot lane duo would take it a step further, giving each other benefits while laning together. But Season 7 was known for a much different reason than the Lovers duo. One item would completely take over the bot lane meta and be known as the worst meta of all time: Ardent Sensor. At this time, Ardent Sensor granted attack speed, on-hit damage, and on-hit healing. This item on Janna or Lulu would make ADCs extremely unkillable, granting them thousands of gold worth of stats. Season 7 Worlds saw Tristana, Kog'Maw, and Xayah as the premier ADCs when paired with Janna or Lulu. But this would have been even more broken if Kalista was played, as she was extremely strong. But Kalista managed to have a 100% ban rate at Season 7 Worlds, not making it into a single game. This world's entire strategy became rush Ardent Sensor as fast as possible, and it felt like ADC was the only role that mattered, but not in a good way. It was so important to get Ardent Sensor online as fast as possible that ADCs would buy Relic Shield first item. This was done to get more gold onto the support to buy Ardent Sensor even faster. Ardent Sensor was the real carry at this time, and it completely suffocated the meta. At the finals of Season 7 Worlds, SKT would attempt to solidify their dynasty with a third win, but Samsung Galaxy was simply better. Ruler would completely dominate over Bang in the final series, with Ruler having a 15.5 KDA and Bang only having a 1.3 KDA. Luckily, Ardent Sensor was nerfed, and looking towards Season 8, there was about to be a big shakeup across all of League. Season 8 saw the old Runes and Mastery system be overhauled, changing them into the new rune system we know today, adding iconic ADC runes like Lethal Tempo, Press the Attack, and Fleet Footwork. But there was one interesting rune that has since been removed: Kleptomancy. Kleptomancy worked as a Spellblade-like sheen, but instead of doing extra damage, it gave you gold and consumable items. Ezreal was one of the best users of Kleptomancy, and it was really fun to play back then. which was perfect because during Season 8, Ezreal got a visual and gameplay update, cleaning up his look and changing his W from the Wave of Damage into the Essence Flux Orb we know today. Varus would also receive a change to his W, giving it an active ability that empowered his Q. Season 8 would see a fan-favorite ADC added to the roster, Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa stood out with her evolution based on stats, diving gameplay, and striking appearance, giving a brand new spin on the ADC role, and since her release, she's been a consistently popular champion. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for ADC in Season 8. 8.11 would see sweeping nerfs to the entire ADC roster, reducing base stats and damage growth. This then got even worse when the funnel meta rolled around. Funneling is a strategy in which your team funnels all their resources into one carry, as they clear both the jungle and the lanes. Some ADC players were still able to play normal ADC picks. For many teams in pro play, they deemed it more efficient to place their ADC on a supportive champion to further funnel the carry. This took the carry potential away from the AD carry. But shortly after its rise in popularity, the funnel meta would be nerfed, making it far less efficient. Season 8 Worlds would see Kai'Sa solidify herself as an iconic ADC, as she was the most picked throughout the tournament. Season 8 Worlds would see a European team make it all the way to the finals for the first time since Season 1, with Reckless on ADC. But unfortunately for Europe, they couldn't claim their second Worlds title, as JackieLove was an absolute beast. Having a mind-blowing 23 KDA, dying only 2 times in the final series, JackieLove's Kai'Sa was a cut above the rest. His World's winning skin ended up going to Kai'Sa, and would become the favorite skin for many Kai'Sa mains. Season 9 brought armor plating to the outer turrets, rewarding lane aggression and ensuring turrets stay up for the first 14 minutes. This encouraged aggressive ADCs to push for plates while ensuring turret safety for scaling ADCs. Season 9 would also give Caitlyn and Ashe visual updates, bringing them to modern standards. This year would add another ADC to the roster, whose design attempted to push the potential of the role. Senna was designed to be both a support and an ADC all in one, but has been both problematic for balance and iconic for her unique kit. With ADCs still being fairly weak from last year, professional play would see the rise of the double support item meta. By starting double support items, the bot lane could share gold and act like duo carries. Sona Taric and Garen Yuumi were the best versions of these strategies, having disgusting amounts of sustain and being completely unkillable in the late game. But that wasn't the only ADC meta of 2019. 2019 was the year of G2, as they won both regional and international tournaments. But the ADC for G2 wasn't an ADC player. G2 Perkz was a mid laner who would role swap to ADC, and with that, Perkz brought a new perspective to the role, creating his own picks like Zoe ADC, Syndra ADC, and Nico ADC. But there was one specific pick that Perkz had huge amounts of success on: Yasuo bot lane. Yasuo was Perkz' speciality, having a 77% win rate on the pick. Perkz showed the world that there was a melee bot laner already in the game. But when G2 made it to the finals at Season 9 Worlds, their opponents were simply much better. Season 9 Worlds was won by FPX, with LWX completely dominating on his Kai'Sa, Varus, and Xayah, not dying a single time in the final series. In the end, it was the traditional marksman of bot lane that had won. But even now, the impact of Perkz is still felt in the bot lane meta of today. Season 10 added elemental rifts to the game, and the craziest change bot lane has ever received: the alcove. But Season 10 would actually have one of the most overpowered champion releases in League of Legends history: Aphelios. Aphelios played like no other champion in the game, having 2 guns active at a time and rotating through 5 different guns, each with a set of ammo. These guns would have different abilities, effects, and ranges, a very complicated champion compared to the rest of the roster. On release, Aphelios was extremely overtuned and capable of absolutely insane amounts of damage with his Infernum and Crescendum guns. This overtuning on top of his already complex kit turned Aphelios into the most disastrous champion release. This would stem the 200 years meme, a meme that would highlight whenever a champion's kit looked completely broken. This meme is still relevant today, as with every new champion release, players pray that it won't be a repeat of the 200 years situation. But Aphelios was not the only ADC released in Season 10. At the end of the season, Samira would be added to the roster. Bringing her combo playstyle, Samira would have to reach an S tier combo to use her ultimate. Samira fights with both a gun and a sword, acting like a ranged and somewhat melee ADC. Season 10 would also see Ghost getting a rework, in an attempt to increase its pick rate. This was done by making the Ghost duration reset on kill. This change was a hypercarry ADC's dream, making Ghost standard on picks like Kog'Maw and Twitch. Season 10 Worlds was not the most exciting, with supportive ADCs like Ashe, Jhin, and Senna being the most popular. However, this was the beginning of the iconic Senna-Tahm bot lane, but at this time, Senna would farm and Tahm would support. The finals would be Damwon versus Suning, with Damwon winning Season 10 Worlds. Ghost on ADC would flex his champion pool, playing a plethora of different carries but performing insanely well on Jhin. With a 100% win rate and a 21 KDA, Ghost only died 3 times on Jhin the entire tournament. Season 11 took one of the last untouched elements of League and brought it up to modern standards: the item shop. This would introduce the Mythic Item system, exclusive powerful items that you could only own one of, and these mythic items were completely broken, offsetting many of the setbacks that made champions balanced. For ADC, Gale Force and Shield Bow were incredibly problematic, Gale Force giving a dash to all immobile ADCs, and Shield Bow giving a giant shield and lifesteal, making any ADC much harder to kill. The dominance of Gale Force was really seen at Season 11 Worlds. The 3 most popular champions of the tournament being Miss Fortune, Aphelios, and Jhin all bought Gale Force. Damwon would make it to the finals for the 2nd year in a row, playing against EDG. But this was an extremely close series with all players performing insanely well. The gap between Ghost and Viper was very small, with only a 1.3 KDA difference, both performing on a variety of different champions. But in the end, Damwon couldn't begin their dynasty, and EDG would win their first Worlds title. For pre-season 12, Lethal Tempo was reworked, removing the 3 seconds of attack speed. Instead, it now stacked attack speed and range on hit. This was incredibly strong for Kog'Maw, giving him ridiculous range when fully stacked. Season 12 would begin with the release of a champion whose designer would deem his biggest failure: Zeri. Zeri took the usual auto attack of ADCs and made it a spammable skill shot on her Q. This was a fresh take on the marksman role, but turned out to become a problematic champion. This skill shot requirement, combined with her high mobility, made Zeri's skill ceiling one of the highest in the game. So when it came to balancing Zeri, she was almost completely tied to her pro player performance. Riot August deemed this a failure, as he wanted Zeri to be fun and viable at all ranks, like his other iconic ADCs of Jhin and Jinx. The Zeri problem would be further exacerbated as she would find an incredibly strong duo in Yuumi. The Tom and Zeri combo of Yuumi and Zeri was completely unstoppable. With Yuumi's constant protection on top of an extremely mobile hypercarry, Yuumi and Zeri would dominate professional play. This meant Zeri had to be balanced around both pro play and the fact she was much stronger when paired with Yuumi. Zeri would receive 4 different sets of nerfs and changes throughout this year. But Zeri was not the only ADC released in Season 12. Later in the year, Nyla would be added to the roster, the official melee bot laner that Riot had been trying to create for many years. Taking the increased XP from the Mordekaiser rework and the ability to dodge auto attacks from Yasuo with an ability based on Jax's E, Nyla has found her place as a niche bot laner, filling that melee ADC fantasy. Halfway through Season 12, the durability patch would be added to League. 12.10 changed the stats of champions to increase durability and reduce how much healing was in the game, with huge sweeping changes to the entire roster. As every champion got harder to kill, tank shredding ADCs were thriving. But by the time of Season 12 Worlds, there was one bot lane combo that was completely dominating the meta. Lucian Nami. Lucian's 2-hit passive worked extremely well with Nami's E. Throughout the year, players had been using Electrocute on Nami, as they could proc Electrocute instantly, giving the duo an extremely dominant level 1. But this had since been nerfed, and so players at Season 12 Worlds were just running Airy but still having immense success. The Season 12 Worlds Finals would be one of the best finals in League of Legends history. It was DRX versus T1, with Deft and Faker leading each team. Having a long history together, the two would clash in an extremely cinematic final. One of the closest and most exhilarating finals in League of Legends history, Deft was the backbone of DRX. And after first stepping onto the world stage in Season 4, 8 years later Deft had finally claimed his world's title. Season 13 wasn't very special for ADC. No new ADCs were added during this season, but there was one item that returned to the game. After a few years of absence, Static Shiv was back, but it had been changed. This version of Static Shiv was actually abused by non-ADCs, as it had a 50% AP ratio, allowing champions like Katarina, LeBlanc, and Voyager to one-shot waves and enemies. Season 13 would see Navori Quickblades made into a mythic item, and it was extremely strong, reducing basic abilities cooldowns on auto attack, but also increasing your abilities damage up to 20% based on your crit. At Season 13 Worlds, Navori Quickblades would dominate the meta, as Xayah and Kai'Sa were the most played ADCs, and both of them bought Quickblades. The finals of Season 13 Worlds would be Weibo Gaming vs T1. Although Kai'Sa and Xayah were dominant throughout the tournament, T1's ADC Gumayusi didn't rely on them. Flexing his deep champion pool, he played 11 different ADCs throughout the tournament, and he performed. In the final series against Weibo, Gumayusi didn't die a single time, carrying ZOFGK to the win. Season 14 would finally remove mythic items from the game, opening up build diversity for the entire league roster. And the new map changes with Grubs would bring symmetry to Summoner's Rift. But it wasn't all good news for the start of Season 14, as a very problematic champion was added to the ADC roster. Smolder was released on the second patch of Season 14, a small dragon that was designed to grow stronger and stronger as he gained stacks. The payoff for hitting 225 stacks was that Smolder would get an execute like the Elder Dragon buff. This execute saw Smolder racking up pentakill after pentakill, with a total of 41 pentakills in professional play during Season 14. Smolder was changed after a few patches to make him feel less oppressive, changing his execute to only trigger if it was his damage that killed the target. But although Smolder had a crazy release, Season 14 was truly the year of Varus. Varus was played with a lethality build, and was an extremely oppressive poking ADC. He had an insanely high pick rate in professional play. So Riot stepped in. Halfway through the year, they reshaped Varus's passive to give him AD and AP based on his attack speed, gutting lethality Varus. But Varus wasn't the only ADC that got reworked. Corki was reworked back into his original state, removing the package mechanic from his passive. This was intended to push him towards the ADC role. But Season 14 was actually the year in which ADCs would take over the mid lane. Corki and Tristana were the number 1 and number 3 most picked mid laners in Season 14. ADCs like Ezreal, Zeri, and Smolder all found their way into the mid lane. But by the time Worlds rolled around, Riot had had enough and completely gutted Corki and Tristana, as they didn't want them in the Worlds meta. With all these changes, we saw much more champion diversity at Worlds. Kai'Sa, Ezreal, Ashe, Kalista, and Jhin all had relatively similar pick rates in ADC. And Corki and Tristana were virtually non-existent. T1 found themselves back in the finals, playing against BLG, and Gumayusi would once again flex his deep champion pool, playing 8 different ADCs throughout the tournament and having very dominant performances on Xayah, once again being the backbone of T1 and helping ZOFGK win their second Worlds title. Finally, we arrive in Season 15. Nothing much has happened for ADC. Currently, Varus, Ezreal, and Miss Fortune are the most picked ADCs in pro play. And the next champion to be released is an ADC. Let me know what role you want me to cover next. It was so interesting to see how far the ADC role has come. If some things were different, it may have been bruises in the bot lane and ADCs in mid. We've seen some of the strangest champions come from the ADC role. Some metas where ADC isn't even a carry, and some metas where ADC is the only role that matters. Seeing some of the most beloved players take this role and push it to its absolute limit. ADC is an incredibly unique role in League of Legends, always riding that edge of danger and excitement. I can't wait to see what champions get added, what metas happen in the future, and what ADC players will rise up to claim the title of being the greatest ADC in the world.